Okay, I had to make some space. Let's see if this is going to work. However, today we are going to discuss eating disorders, but not all of them because there are several different types of eating disorders. Now, I'm sure you've heard of that. You heard of eating disorders, and probably the most common one is anorexia, or what they also refer to as anorexia nervosa. Or another one, I'm sorry, is very common or very well known is bulimia. So I'm sorry, I think there are two very, um, when I say popular, I mean by people are familiar with. Now, there is one where people are least familiar with, and it is a very unique and awkward, different, unusual eating disorder. And what is that? Let's see. For example, have you ever done something silly as a child? What is the craziest thing you've eaten as a child? I remember one thing I've done. I don't know why. When I was a kid playing with friends, and one day we're sitting on the lawn, I decided to eat the grass. I don't know. The grass had this texture. It was kind of cool and crispy inside, and like this bitter taste to it, and I didn't like it. So anyhow, that was a fun experiment. But there are some disorders where people really have a tend to eat things that are very unusual, that are not that doesn't have nutritional value. Now, one in particular may be paper. What do they call this disorder? They call it pica. It looks like it's pronounced pica, Pica, but it's pronounced pica, pica disorder. So, with that being said, before I get into that, let's generally go over the eating disorders. So the main eating disorders, which can occur during childhood up into adulthood and even throughout the senior years, are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and binge eating disorder. Now, these terms have changed over time. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they did change some of the words around with the new DSM. One that is more common during childhood is pica disorder because for children, putting things in their mouth, it's a sensory. They get to explore and learn different things with the texture, the taste, the feel, and the sense. So it's very common for kids to put things in their mouth, like toys or a pencil or whatever, like a piece of clothing. However, now if it becomes to a point where it is unhealthy, it is called pica disorder. So what is that? It's a compulsive when someone compulsively swallow non-food items. Now, that could be something that's even dangerous. I know you've probably seen those shows. I do not know the name of the shows, but they have all these different shows like My 600 Pound Life, or, where people have these weird or awkward disorders, like collecting dolls, for example, or just meaningless things that could turn into hoarding and create an unsafe environment. So there was one where a lady was eating her mattress, and another episode I recall, the lady was eating the ashes of her deceased husband, which is really extreme. Now, while it is often harmless, swallowing certain items can make pica very hazardous, of course, right? Just imagine some things could be poisonous. So this can be treated with some therapy, possibly medication and modification. So modification may mean just finding different ways to where the person may not have access to these items or products anymore. This could stem from some type of trauma. It can be several reasons as to why someone would have a disorder or develop such a disorder. Now, pica gets its name from a bird species, the Eurasian name magpie. The bird has a reputation for eating unusual objects. So that's cool. There's some little, correlation there. So who does pica affect? It can affect young children, especially those under 6 years old, people who are pregnant. Now, people who are pregnant, I don't know why they said people, women who are pregnant tend to have unusual cravings like pickles and ice cream, but not so much eating, a mattress or flowers. So people with certain mental health conditions, especially autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disabilities, or schizophrenia, tend to have a higher rate of a pica disorder. So how common is it? So according to this article, it is also common for healthcare providers to miss this diagnosis or to miss this condition because the signs could be very hard to come across, but it doesn't give any demographic statistics in this article, unfortunately. However, it is kind of a compulsive disorder because the person has this compulsion to do something and they just can't stop. And it's like a record being played in their head and something telling them, like, you have to do this, you must do this. And sometimes they just feed into those thoughts and they can't help themselves. So that can be very frustrating for the person suffering from this disorder. Sometimes they do not have the tools or know how to stop these behaviors that are unhealthy. So for people who eat things like ice cream, it's very common. However, dangerous items could lead to hospitalization or even worse. So just to go over a little more things now, they have one here like hair. You will see maybe kids putting hair in their mouth, but the worst thing, which I don't want to get into, dirt, feces, those kind of things like clay that carries germs, parasites, really can cause infections and be very dangerous. Now, people often feel very embarrassed and ashamed about their condition. So, because of that, they may not seek treatment. So, what are some of the symptoms for people who suffer from pica disorder? One is anemia, which is low iron, constipation, imbalance in electrolytes, irregular heartbeat rhythms, lead poisoning, issues with the small or large intestines, and ringworms. Oh no. So common non-food items, the most common food items that are eaten for people who suffer this disorder is ash. Now when they say ash, it can be cigarette ashes, right? Ooh, have you ever tried, not to say, hey, have you like purposely tried to eat cigarette ashes? No. But I've had by accident, and that's the most disgusting taste ever. How did that happen? My mom had some habits, bad habits growing up, that I recall. Well, okay, I'm not putting her down. Not a lot. Okay, there was one. Besides leaving the iron on. Okay. One was to put out her cigarette butt, or to put out her cigarette, she would put it in her canned soda. So I remember her favorite soft drink was orange. It was the Crush, the orange soda. And, me as a kid, being a kid, you see a cup or, a soda, and I just thought, yeah, I was just like, I want to take a sip. So I took a sip of the soda, and it was full of cigarette ashes, gross. And probably I learned a good lesson. I think that was the last time I did that. So another thing here that is common, that people eat who have pica disorder is chalk. I can see why. Yeah, chalk might be interesting taste. It has that little chalky, like dry taste to it. Charcoal, clay, dirt, soil, ground coffee grind, or ground coffee, eggshells. Like, wow, that must be, baby or talcum powder. Now, some of these I can kind of understand why they would like those that category of items because they have these textures to it. So it might have to do with the texture of things. Now the other things are yeah, we already talked about that. We're not gonna go there again. So ice, for example, hair string, thread. Now laundry starch, paper, paint chips, pebbles. I don't know about that. Soap, that may not be too tasty. Wool or cloth. And the last is pet food. Dog food or cat food. Which one would you choose? Wet or dry? Either way, I would gag. Now, here they have some, I think there was some issue or some, how can I say, some good reasons or causes for people who may crave these items because they may have a deficiency in their body. So they may crave these things to kind of balance that off, which is common. So a medical condition, sickle cell anemia, are two common things or conditions where people have a connection with the disorder pica. Mental health condition, this include a person who may either be through birth has some disruptions and developed it through the womb, or it may be some type of genetic disorder. Other reasons are anxiety, stress, negative conditions during childhood, and cultural learned behavior. Now let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, let's do a few more minutes. I want to keep them pretty short until I build an audience. And so I'm sure some things could be pretty embarrassing if you have to go to the emergency room and they do an x-ray and then they see a big piece of chalk in your stomach. But I'm sure there have been worse cases where people had to go to emergency rooms and get an x-ray. No comment. So anyhow, what are the type of treatments that are used for this disorder? Mild aversive therapy. Think of adverse. So it's like adverse is more like the opposite, right? So this technique teaches people to avoid pica behavior using mild aversions, which is connected or tied to a consequence. So they would teach the person to avoid the non-food item and positively reinforce them with a food item that is healthy. So that is definitely a behavioral type of therapy, conditioning, which is probably one of the best when it comes to learning new behavior. Another one, behavioral therapy. This also involves teaching them coping mechanism to change their behavior and differential reinforcement. With this method, people learn to avoid pica behaviors by focusing on other behaviors and activities. So I would call that like a type of distraction. Also, is delayed gratification, which is a really common type of behavioral therapy that can help people to taper off from unwanted behavior, especially things that are unhealthy, even like smoking. So, for example, if you are smoking 10 cigarettes a day and you want to cut down, this is not healthy. You shouldn't be smoking at all. So, what would you do? Delayed gratification. Say you're smoking a cigarette every 2 hours. So now instead of every 2 hours, you are going to challenge yourself to go every 3 hours and not smoke a cigarette. And try during that time to distract yourself, do some activity, just do anything to not have yourself think about smoking that cigarette. Over time, the delayed gratification time frame will get greater. And eventually, you could taper down to 5 cigarettes a day to the point where you will not crave cigarettes any longer. Now, our medication used for this, yes, antipsychotic medications are best. But of course, with anything, there may be some side effects. Consult with your doctors. There may be some complications with that. So the sooner the better that you get help and treatment. So if you have a child or someone you may know, even an elderly, because sometimes when our elderly gets into the dementia or Alzheimer phase, they could possibly learn or relearn older behaviors or develop new behaviors that may not be healthy, and pica could be one of them. So please keep a good eye on your loved ones. And if you yourself suffer from pica disorder, remember there is help and there is hope. So please reach out, check out all the different possibilities, call your insurance company, and get a list of therapists, psychiatrists, go online, Psychology Today. Sorry, it's been a long day, a very long day. Whew. So I wanted to do this, of course, afternoon, but now it's early evening. So please forgive me. But anyhow, check out Psychology Today. There's therapy.com. There are so many different ways to where you can find treatment and help. Also, treatment centers where you can get that special help during the time you recover. So be well, take care, and goodbye.